So we're not Mexican.
You said we're not Mexican. Mexico is a country. To be Mexican, you have to be born in Mexico because that's a nationality. However, originally, there's a word that I use in here that is called Mexica. That is not a country. That's not a nationality. That is a ethnicity, an identity. The Mexica people are what the country of Mexico was named after. Because you have to realize, there's borders that, split, and there's United States, Mexico, El Salvador, whatnot, right? Well, guess what? We, as indigenous people, we didn't build those borders. It was Europeans who built those borders. Okay, I'm Mexican because I was born in Mexico, but that doesn't define my culture and my ethnicity. I'm not going to allow a border built by people who don't like me, who try to ruin me, to also say, okay, this border defines you. No, you don't. I know what I am. You don't tell me. You see, so to answer your question, Mexico is just a country. If you really go to Mexico, just like the United States, there's black people, there's Asian people, there's Indians, meaning people of India. You turn on Univision, the channel, Spanish channel, they're all white people, blonde, blue eyes, they're white people. You see? Mm-hmm. They are all people who could just say, I'm Mexican because they're born there. Okay, sure, yeah, that's your nationality. But what is your ethnic background? You see? That's what is important to me. Go ahead.
I thought the borders were actually built not to keep people out, but to know what country is which.
It wasn't that. It was the Europeans that arrived in the United States. They said, this is ours now. We're going to put a border around it. No one can come in here. This is our land. See, we destroyed the indigenous people. We put them in reservations, and we built this land. Now you guys cannot come in here.
California was ours. Right?
Okay, that's also a very important question. You said California was ours. Mm-hmm. Well, before the Europeans, there was no borders whatsoever. So technically, the entire Americas was ours because our ancestors originally, prior to European invasion and occupation, our ancestors could go anywhere.
Like the names of the cities, like Sacramento, Los Angeles.
Well, those are Spanish names because think about it, Los Angeles. What is that? Spanish. See, a lot of our places are named after the people who invaded them.
San
Jose, San Francisco. This is mine. Name it after me. That's how it came to be. Yes.
So basically, we're
indigenous. I don't use the word Indian. I don't call myself Indian because there are already a people known and named Indians, which are the people of India. We are indigenous, and I use that, and I believe it's very important to use that as opposed to Indian because indigenous automatically means we are the original people of this land, and I believe that's important to know because what are white people in the United States trying to do? Deport. Who are they deporting? Who? People who look like who? Like you guys, brown people, indigenous people. So you're telling me that you guys, Europeans, white people, came from another land, arrived here, and said, oh, you guys are going to get deported. Whoa. First of all, you're not an immigrant. The immigrant are the people who are trying to throw you out of here. Those are the immigrants. So it's correct to say the immigrants are trying to replace us. That's why it's important to know this stuff because when we allow them to tell us who we are immigrants. And that's what people who colonize you want to do. They want to erase what you are and tell you what you are. Give you your worth and your value. And that is the problem. And that's why I write. We have allowed the colonizers to, of course, erase who we are. And also afterwards tell us, okay, now you're this. You're Latino. You're Hispanic. And that's what we claim. How can the people who obviously hated us and destroyed us also tell us who we are? Like the common Mexican, I didn't even know what Thanksgiving was. I just knew it as a day of giving thanks. Thanks for what? I don't know. We never were told why. We never learned or were told about the history of what are we giving thanks to. So, as a kid, with my family, we celebrated Thanksgiving. However, when I was 23 years of age, I met this Native American. His name was Arlie Steele, a white mountain Apache from the San Carlos Reservation. The reason why I met him was because I was a tattoo artist at the time, so he wanted Native pride tatted on his forearms. As I was tattooing him, I realized that he had an accent when he spoke English. The irony is when you look at him and you look at me, you think we're related. So I assumed that he is Honduran or Salvadorian or something. He probably speaks Spanish. That's why he has an accent. So when I said to him, hey, where are you from? I'm from Arizona. But I mean like your race. He says, oh, I'm Native American. I was so ignorant to what Native American even was. When I thought about Native American, I thought about what the movies, Dances with Wolves, wolves, these guys dressed in skin and with feathers, meaning a people that no longer exist. So when this guy is getting native pride, I have no idea what that means. I'm just doing a tattoo. So when I ask him and he says I'm native, I really don't even know what that means, because I can't equate that someone who looks like me is one of those people riding around on horses wearing the animal skin and the feathers on his head. You speak Spanish? Nah, man. What language you speak? Of course, I ask him because of accent. He says, I speak Apache. Apache meaning like, ooh, that Apache? And he starts laughing. He says, yeah. I said, so you're Native American? Yeah, that's why I'm getting the tattoos. I was like, oh, shit. And I'm thinking in my head, I thought y'all were extinct. Really? That's what I thought. Because if you pay attention to movies, every time they make a movie of Native Americans, it's a history movie. It's a past tense. It's never a modern Native American. When have you seen a modern Native American movie? As I'm tattooing him, he's teaching me about his culture, his ancestry, what goes on in the reservation that he was born in, that he was raised in. And as he's telling me about his culture, something is resonating with me. 2 years later, my grandpa said something to me. He said, you know, the people where you're from are known as a Yaqui people. Just a simple comment that he made. I already had the conversation with the Apache. So when my grandpa says, where you're from, the people are known as Yaqui, I stopped. What did you say, sir? Oh, I was just saying the people where you're from, they're known as Yaqui. The Native American word doesn't exist. So I'm not expecting him to say, oh, the Native American. No, the people of that pueblo are known as Yaqui. I learned that my grandma's first language is Nahuatl. When I learned this, I began to make sense of what the Apache was telling me and why it resonated with me. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that this whole time, me as a Mexican, I've been proud to speak Spanish, thinking that's our language. And then you go to Mexico and you see all kinds of different races, and they're just Mexican because Mexican is a nationality. But I've been claiming to be Mexican as if it were a race for my whole life.
I'm not gonna lie, my mom would say I'm Dominican by blood, and I thought it was a race the entire time. I'm not gonna lie.
Mexican people say Mexican is in my blood. It used to make sense to say that, but now it does not. When I was 23 years of age, I ran into an article. The article was about Thanksgiving. This article was not describing what we today blindly and ignorantly celebrate. What is it that we're celebrating? Now, in my case, when I read this article, it showed images of Native American women being tied up from their feet to trees, pregnant bellies cut open. It was describing all the ways that the Spaniards were unaliving the Native American women. When I read this, I wasn't too shocked that these things happened. Of course, I've seen movies where white folks are fighting with the Native Americans in these older movies. I've seen that stuff. I'm aware of the wars in the past. However, I never knew that Thanksgiving, what it really represents is when the Pilgrims sat down with the Native Americans and pretended to offer peace. And once they gathered them around and got them drunk, they wiped them out. That is the real gathering of Thanksgiving. When I learned this and realized how evil it was, it affected me. However, when I learned that these people that this happened to, it wasn't a people of the past. It was us, our people, our ancestors. Wait a minute. I've been celebrating the wiping away of our own ancestors. So I'm giving thanks to the colonizers coming and wiping us out. These Native Americans are not a people of the past. It's us. We have just been rebranded as Mexican, Salvadorian, Guatemalan, Latino, Hispanic. It's called ethnic erasure or ethnic cleansing. You kidnap a people, you shove them in Indian boarding schools, force them to no longer speak their languages, remove their original names, and force them to have Spanish names, English names, French names, Portuguese names, just like slavery for black people. Also kidnapped, stripped away from their ethnicities, their culture, everything that they are. Black people now today identify as Johnson, speak English, speak Spanish. The only difference here is that black people have a good idea that they're not white versus us who on paper we've been identifying as white. And that's how much ethnic cleansing has affected us. We've been blinded by the fact that they took away our names, our languages, our culture, everything that we are, and replace it with the colonizer's identity. Hence, colonialism. When I think about the aftermath of colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and acculturation, and then I see us celebrating Thanksgiving, we're giving thanks because they took away everything. They slaughtered our ancestors. They built their own countries on top of our corpses. That is Thanksgiving. I can't give thanks to that.
I didn't know really what happened in Thanksgiving until like a year ago, and I told my mom, I'm going to celebrate Thanksgiving. She's like, ¿por qué no?
So one day my mom hits me up on Thanksgiving, says, hey, I got the turkey ready. And this would be the first time I say, I'm not celebrating that. And she says, wait, what? What are you talking about? I'm not celebrating that day of mass unaliving. What are you talking about, son? I said, Mom, did you know that Thanksgiving is giving thanks to the fact that the Europeans wiped out Native Americans? And she says, that has nothing to do with that. That has everything to do with us. And that represents us as a whole. We think that has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with us. We just are so ignorant and unaware of who we actually are. I had a friend. I met him when I was 10. He became my friend all the way through college. He invited me over. I came in. And I always noticed that this friend of mine, he looked just like me. Dark skin, brown, same features, full lips, you know, los ojos jaladitos así, you know. And I walked in his house, man, and his mother walked up to me, came up and said something, but it wasn't in Spanish. And I looked at him, and for a moment I thought, he's not Mexican? I had no idea what she said. And I looked at him and I said, what'd she say? Oh, she wants to know if you want some bread. Oh, tell her I'm okay though. They communicate with each other. And she says again, offer me the bread. And I looked at him. What did she say? She says, you have to take it. Okay, took it. And she wouldn't leave until I took a bite. She was just there in my face staring at me. And she smiled, said something, moved along. And I looked at him and I said, hey, I thought you were Mexican, not Asian. And then he said, I'm Guatemalan. Now, me being very ignorant, I said, wait, ain't that Mexican? And he says, no, that's in Guatemala. That's not in Mexico?
What state is that in Mexico?
Yeah, that's what I thought. You guys don't speak Spanish? He said, yeah, but we also speak Maya. And I said, oh, okay. I walked outside and I thought, these are not my people. These are something else. I'm sitting outside waiting for him to come out, thinking, damn, this whole time I thought he was my people, but I guess he's something else. But now, as I think back, I'm like, he was my people. He just is more in tune with our originality. There's a systemic effort to make sure that we don't know where we come from. I'm working at a restaurant, 18 years old. I'm a server, and there's a table with 4 Native American men. I walk over there to offer them a drink. One of those guys said this to me. Hey, brother, what tribe are you from? I said, oh, I'm Mexican. And then he looked at me, and he looked at his friends, and then he looked back at me. He said, it's the same thing, brother. I'm like, okay. And I walked off, and I thought, I think this guy thinks I'm Native American. I thought that to myself. And I was like, it's okay, let him think that. Some years later, when I'm doing my research, and I do a DNA test just like you did, and I see the results of 82% Native American, it hurt my heart, man, because I thought he was a fool for thinking I'm Native American just like him. I'm thinking, I'm not Native, I'm Mexican, bro. And now I realize I'm only Mexican because the Mexican government made the efforts to ethnically wipe us out and force us to identify as Mexican. Force us to no longer speak our native languages, but instead force us to speak Spanish. That's why we're Mexican. And it makes me sad because most of my life, I proudly claim to be Mexican, thinking that Mexican is a race, but no. Mexican is just a nationality. And to find out that I've been proud to claim something that was forced onto me in order to erase my native ethnic root, or at least sense of identity, ooh, it burns. Because not only did the Spaniards arrive here and obviously did their best to erase us, but after we survived the onslaught, okay, we couldn't get rid of these people. They're still here. It's okay though. We don't need to wipe them out literally anymore. We could just force them to stop identifying as Native Americans. We're going to prevent them from identifying by tribe and prevent them from speaking their native languages. Now, you guys have to be forced to identify as Mexican and only speak Spanish. So, they actually erased us because now you and I are here talking about we Mexican. Which, it's not our fault. That's all we known. But the fact that that's all we known is where the problem really comes into play. It's like, damn. We can't even blame our parents or our grandparents because it's not us directly who this was done to. it was our grandparents who this was done to. And the problem started there a couple generations back. Now, thinking back to that Native American man who said, "Hey brother, what tribe are you?" "Oh, I'm not Native, I'm Mexican." "Same thing, brother." I walked off thinking he's a fool. But he knew something I didn't know. Now, with that said, we were meant to know so little about who we are that one day I was hanging out with some Mexicans and a Chinese guy whose English was not that great, but he could still speak it enough. He was communicating with us Mexican guys. He was attempting to ask us if we were Native American. And the way he did, he said, "Hey, amigos, you..." He did that and he did this, like the arrow, shooting arrow thing. He says, "You..." They laughed and they said, "Tell him we ain't that. Tell him we Mexican." I tell the Chinese guy. They said, "No, they're Mexican." And he says, "Mexico!" Oh! What he was trying to say, "Bro, you Mexicans are Native Americans." The sad part is that this Chinese guy knew who we were, but we did not. A lot of people say Arizona, California, Texas, used to be Mexico. We didn't cross the border crossed us. I got a better question than that. What was there when there just was no border at all? So there really is no such thing as Mexico, United States, Canada. These are colonies. The concept of colony, of country, is European. So for us to say that, los gringos, they took away parts of Mexico, California really belongs to us, Texas belongs to us, Arizona belongs, who is us? And what is Mexico really? It's a colony created by the Spaniards. What is the United States? It's a colony created by the English. So we have the mentalities of the conquerors because we are trying to claim land based on the idea of colony, of country, when really the indigenous way of thinking is, wait a minute, never mind California used to be Mexico, never mind Texas used to be, Arizona used to be Mexico. What was all of this before the white man came to draw a goddamn line? Before there was a border, parts of Mexico was also Apache land, Navajo land. But when the border was made, some of those Apache, some of those Navajo, some of those Yaqui remained in Mexico. So now they're known as Mexican. But yet, by lineage, they are the descendants of the Apache, the Navajo. That's why a lot of times you see a Lakota, you see a Navajo, and Apache, they look just like me. A lot of Native people have told me, like Navajo people will tell me, "Damn dude, you sure you're not Native?" And that's when I was much younger. And I would say, no, I'm Mexican. But now, if they would have met me, "You sure you're not Native?" I would have been like, let's have a talk real quick. What exactly is a Native? Sure, I identify as a Mexican. Sure, I was born there. But what was I before the colony was created, the border was created by the European? And what were you? We might have been from the same tribe. I might have been a Navajo too. I might have been an Apache too. But this border, when it was created and it split, some of the Navajo remain in Mexico, some of the Apache, some of the Lakota, some of the Yaqui. Even today in Arizona, there's Yaqui. In Sonora, Mexico, there's Yaqui. Well, how? Well, duh, because the border split them. You see? So we are a people that have been divided by border. So I don't say things like Texas and California used to belong to us. I don't say things like that. I say the border divided indigenous people. California don't belong to Mexico. Texas don't belong to Mexico. That's still a colonizer mentality. Those are still colonial ideas. When you were at school, you identified yourself as an American, and you were corrected by a white teacher and said, "You're Mexican American." But the reality is that you were born here, but he was determined to convince you that no, you're not American. And your point was, no, I'm American just like you. You're not like me. Where are your parents from? They're from Mexico, but I was born here. Oh, so you're Mexican American. Well, that's because white people feel entitled to the land, to the country. They're the real American. Everyone else is African American, Asian American, Mexican American. If you were to say, I'm not Latino, I'm not Hispanic, I'm not an immigrant, I'm the original American before it was known as America, they would see that as a threat, because their response is, where does that leave me then? And perhaps that's why it makes sense that they've been trying to systemically push the propaganda of trying to identify us as anything else, just not indigenous. Because if you say, I'm not Hispanic, I'm not Latino, I'm indigenous American, I'm the original American before I was American, oh, that's a threat. The phrase hija or hijo de la chingada was what the quote-unquote mestizo child was called when he or she was born, because you see, the word mestizo itself, it actually means half-breed. So, breed. What is a breed? It is when you grab animals and breed them. So then how did we come about the word breed to use on a human? Well, it's easy. The Spaniards didn't view indigenous people as humans. They considered them to be subhumans, perros, right? So when the Spaniard impregnated an indigenous woman, the child came out half human and half dog. So it's a breed. They breeded the human with these animals. So that is when the child is born, the mestizo, the half breed, it was called hijo de la chingada. Why? Because it was very common for the Spaniard to have raped the indigenous woman, so the child is son of the damned. Hijo de la chingada. That is the origins of hijo de la chingada. So when we today, us Mexicans, call each other hijos de la chingada, we're using the same phrase that was given to us by the Spaniard rapist when the Spaniard were raped the indigenous woman and we were born el hijo or la hija de la chingada, the child of the damned. I met this girl and she looked a lot like you, and she was from Oaxaca too. We went on a date. She was working towards becoming a teacher. So as we were on our date, hanging out, I asked her, what makes you want to be a teacher? What inspired you? And she says, I want to educate our people. So I said, who's our people? And she says, Hispanics. And I said, okay. You consider yourself Hispanic? I asked her. She said, yeah, of course. I said, okay, carry on. And she says, don't you? No, I don't. And she says, you're not Hispanic? What are you then? I said, well, it doesn't matter. You're telling me your story. I was just trying to make sure who your people were. Just carry on with your story. And she says, no, you're not Hispanic? Because she was confused. At this point, she probably was assuming that I wasn't even Mexican. You get me? Because of my statement. So I said, no, of course not. She says, what are you? I said, I'm Mexican. And she says, yeah, you're Hispanic. I said, no, I'm not. She says, do you know what Hispanic is? And I said, yeah, it's a descendant of Spain. I'm not from Spain. And she looks puzzled. She says, what are you? I said, I'm indigenous. And she says, oh. I said, aren't you? She says, no. I said, you're not? She says, no. I said, you descend from Spain? She says, yeah. And you know this because you took a DNA test? You know this because it was knowledge passed down from your great-grandparents? Or how do you know this for sure? She says, well, no, I've never done a DNA test or anything. It's common sense that we are descendants of Spain. And I said, how is it common sense? She said, we speak Spanish. We have Spanish names and stuff. I said, and so that identifies us as people of Spain? She said, when you say you're indigenous, why don't you have an indigenous name? Why don't you speak an indigenous language? I said, it's due to ethnic cleansing. Do you know what that is? And she stays quiet for a little bit. And I say, when I look at you, I see indigenous people. And her body language, her face expression, it's almost like I insulted her. She got very uncomfortable when she says, but I'm not them. I said, I'm telling you, when I look at you, your facial features, your eyes, your cheekbones, everything about you, you're indigenous. No, I'm not from a tribe. I said, do you want to know why you're not from a tribe? And she didn't say anything. She just looks at me. I said, because once upon a time, Mexican government made the effort to prohibit indigenous people, indigenous tribes, to identify by tribe and no longer speak their indigenous languages and force them all to identify as Mexican. That's how we came to be Mexican, really. So all of us people that once upon a time were Zapotec, Mixtec, no more. Very few places remain where they still identify by tribe. But on a large scale, the real reason why, although you're obviously indigenous and so am I, we only identify by what the colonizers wanted us to identify. And so, coming back in full circle, that's the reason why I don't identify as Latino, Hispanic, Mestizo, and whatever other garbage they throw at us, right? Because I know that aside from the fact that Europeans arriving here in an attempt to wipe us out, literally, after we still survived, then they used their systemic effort to try to tell us, you no longer could speak your languages. You no longer could identify by tribe. You now had to identify as a Latino, as a Mestizo, as a Hispanic. So now we're here. Now you're here. A woman who, when I see an indigenous woman. You do a DNA test, you got 61% Native American, and yet you're saying, my whole life I thought I was a Latina and I thought I was Hispanic, but then I realized I'm not. So then what am I? And that is the perfect example of our condition as a whole, is the fact that they wanted us to not know who we are. So now you see a lot of us talking about, I'm a proud immigrant. I come here to work hard, you see? So there's an agenda to make us feel like we're the immigrant. And who is trying to make us feel like we're the immigrants? The immigrants.
And she was like, so what are you? I was like, I'm American. She was like, no, you're not. I was like, I'm American. I'm just like you. She's like, no, you're not. Where are your parents? I was like, they're from Mexico. They're from Oaxaca. And she was like, oh, so you're Mexican American. I'm like, no, I'm American like you. So she's trying to like say that I'm Mexican American, but I want to be just like you, just like how you feel that you're American. That's how I want to feel.
You were in the right initially because, you see, white people, they feel entitled to the land. Everywhere they go, they feel like it belongs to them. No matter where they go. They go to Mexico and they're born there, they're Mexican. But yet, they want to identify other people as Afro-Mexican or whatever. Everywhere white people go, they feel entitled to the land. They want to claim that nationality, if you will. No subcategory, no Euro-American, whatever. I'm just American. I'm just Mexican. I'm Belizean. I'm Panamanian. I'm Puerto Rican. All the white folks, where they're born, that's what they claim. But then they want to turn around and tell you, where are your parents from? Where do your people come from? Oh, I mean, Mexico. Oh, so you're Mexican American? Okay. Where your people come from? You come from Europe, so you're European American, huh? Whoo, they'll get offended. You want to know why they'll get offended? Because they don't want you to identify them as foreigners. They don't want to ever feel like they're immigrants. They want you to feel like you're a foreigner. The fact that you said, I'm just like you, no, you're not. I'm white. You can never be like me. Get back in line. You get me? The worst thing that you could tell a white person is, I'm just like you. Excuse me? No, you're not. You ain't just like me. I'm white. Don't you ever forget that. We're up here. Y'all are just down here, taking our crumbs. So, I believe you hit a spot. You hit a nerve. You struck a nerve on her when you said, I'm American, just like you. And she says, no, you're not. It's because they feel entitled to the land. I was raised in a household where, in a sense, I was taught to be careful with black people. Black people are violent, dangerous, etc. But I always found myself getting into fights with Mexicans and or Chicanos all the time. And it was usually because being picked on for same reason as you. Didn't pronounce English correctly. Whatever the flaws that I had earned for being a wetback. Aside from being a wetback itself. and sometimes I walked away with my head down and other times I defended myself. But either way, I always found myself getting in fights due to being picked on by Mexicans and or Chicanos. And just like you, when I moved to a black neighborhood, getting picked on thing was gone. And I realized that the black kids seem eager to want to play with me. Seem eager to bring me along with them. And I remember wondering once, I was warned to be careful with these people, but I don't feel endangered when I'm with them. On the contrary, oftentimes when I'm roaming with them, I feel very safe. But yet, the first time I attempted to bring a black friend to the house, my mom, don't bring that black kid in. And you know what's crazy though, man? It wasn't just the black kids. It was anyone who's dark skinned, even if they were my complexion. Don't bring that prieto in here. But if it was a light skin, regardless if it was a Chicano, whatever, or a white person, if they're light skinned, there's no problem in bringing them in the house. But if it was a dark skin, whether a black or a brown, that was my complexion or darker, no metas ese pinche prieto pa dentro. So, what do you think when people say that Mexicans, or Mexico rather, there is no racism in Mexico?
There is a lot.
That although I'm born in Mexico, I've been treated my whole life like somebody not born there because of my English speaking, obviously. I was 19 years of age. I was walking down to the grocery store to get some sunflower seeds. There was a driveway full of Mexicans. One of the younger dudes that were there invited me to have a beer. He was the only one around my age. Meanwhile, the other men that were there in their 30s. But they all had one thing in common. They were all undocumented people. From what I could see, they had just recently arrived from Mexico. That the way that they looked at me, it was cautious. They didn't look at me as a brethren, as a Mexicano, as a paisano. They looked at me as a pocho. It was very cold. It was around the winter. But the guy that offered me the beer, he had a buttoned up shirt unbuttoned. And I said to him, hey man, why don't you go get a jacket? It's cold. It's freezing. He says, oh, this is all I got. I said, what do you mean that's all you got? Oh, I just arrived from Mexico last night. I was born in Mexico. I know that struggle. So I felt compassion. So I told these other guys, did you guys just recently arrive too? And they kind of were a little hesitant in conversing with me. But one of them said, yeah, we just got here. Not gonna lie, I began to kind of grow a little knot in my throat, a little teary-eyed. And I said, you know what? I'll be right back. So I went home and I started filling up a bag full of my clothes that I don't wear. I walked back. As I was on my way back there, I was teary. I was actually crying. It made me cry to know that these people are struggling like that. And I know what they're about to go through. Being humiliated because they can't speak English. Being made fun of. Being picked on. Life is very tough. You don't know your way around. In every way, shape, or form, it's very difficult when you first arrive. But before I got there, I make sure to wipe them. I didn't want them to see me cry, you know? So once I got there, the younger guy approached me and said, what do you got there? And I pulled out his really nice jacket and I said, here, put it on. He says, are you going to let me borrow it? I said, you could have it. He said, are you sure? I was like, just keep it. And then the other guys now were coming because they saw I was pulling out some goods, you know? So everybody started putting clothes on, the sweaters. I have a lot of clothes, you know? So finally, a pickup truck arrives. He walks up to these guys. I'm over here kind of on the side with the younger guy. And then so he looked at me. And for whatever reason, he assumed that I didn't speak Spanish. So he said to them, oh, a ese no le den la espalda, porque si le dan la espalda, te mete el cuchillo. Which means to those kind of people, you don't turn your back on them, because they'll stab you in the back. When he said that, it hurt so much, because I knew that he said that because he assumed that I was born here. And because of that, although we come from the same root, I'm his enemy. I'm someone not to trust. Never mind that we come from the same Aztec, Maya origin. Never mind that. You weren't born where we were. By that, you're not one of us anymore. And I said to him in Spanish, I said, what is my kind? And he turned and he was like startled that, oh, he speaks Spanish. I'm born in Mexico too. But even if I weren't, not being born in Mexico makes me the enemy, although I'm obviously one of you. All these other guys were watching this. I said, so what about when you have children here? They're going to not be born in Mexico. Are they going to be your enemy? Are other Mexicans going to look at your children like they're your enemy? How does it work? That can't make me the enemy. There's a lot of Mexican people right now marching to try to demand human rights for us so that we won't get deported. I said, I realize that our problem is not white people trying to deport us. The problem is us. We hate ourselves. We hate each other. We divide each other because of this silly reason. Because of our mentality, this mentality that you have is why it's easy to push us around. We are so divided that we're easy to control. We're easy to destroy. I said, so when we out there holding signs, give us human rights, don't deport us, you know what? I'll never fight for that no more. What I'm going to start fighting for is that first we love each other before we try to tell white people to please stop hating us. I realized that day what is wrong with us. I realized why we still are in the condition that we are at the very bottom. The easiest to bully, the easiest to systemically oppress. Look how we are. I was born in a place known as Ejido Hermosillo. In English, you would translate it to beautiful village. Although it is a village made up of predominantly indigenous people, it is a people that suffer deeply from internalized racism. So it is beautiful because it is made up of my people. But where the beauty goes away is that these beautiful people believe that they're everything opposite of beautiful. And I will elaborate on that. One of the first things that stuck to my mind was when I heard my grandmother say, oh, look, he came out white or light-skinned, beautiful like an angel. I will never forget that it was that moment when, although I didn't know how to put things together as a little kid, I didn't know how to analyze as deeply. What I did know is that I know now what it takes to be beautiful, what it takes to be pretty. And that's one thing I'll never get to accomplish in life. So what I would do growing up as a kid, my mother would often tell us, get away from the sun. You're getting darker. So I would do my best not to play out in the sun, and I would always be in a shade with attempts to not get darker. Whenever I would bathe, I would grab the sponge and I would scrub so hard, so hard, sometimes to where my knees bled because I was trying to scrub the blackness lo prieto from my skin. And I remember when I was a kid, a lot of light-skinned kids would make fun of us who were darker because we had patches of darker skin, like our knees, our elbows, and things like that, right? And those were the areas where I would scrub the hardest. And what I learned as a kid as well is I learned that my mother would use bleach to whiten the clothes. So I would pour bleach in the bathtub and I would scrub with bleach, hoping and assuming that I would whiten. Because I really believed as a kid that this was not skin color. It was not pigmentation. I believed this was dirt. Yo pensé que era tierra. I said, why is it that when I scrub and scrub and scrub and put bleach, no matter how hard I scrub, the dirt doesn't come off? How do these kids that are light skinned, they're able to scrub the dirt off of them, but I can't? I believed my whole infancy that this was just dirt and I was just not good enough at scrubbing. And I remember asking my mom too as a kid, crying because I was bleeding from my knees. That's how much I would scrub. How come I can't get this dirt off of me? The kids keep making fun of me. One of the things that I also heard a lot between my mother and father, when they would get in arguments, the way that my father would insult my mother is by calling her all kinds of things that related to indigeneity. Pinche India fea, pinche Oaxaquita. This word right here, Oaxaquita, is very important here. Because, you see, for those of you who don't know what that means, Oaxaquita stems out of the word Oaxaca. Oaxaca is a state in Mexico that is predominantly indigenous. Although we, in my village, we were indigenous people, Oaxaca was known exclusively for being predominantly indigenous, that whenever we as indigenous people in our regions would want to insult another person, we would insult them by calling them Oaxaquita, which is a derogatory word that is making fun of the indigeneity in the state of Oaxaca. Because we related Oaxaca with indigeneity, we would use Oaxaquita as a way to insult ourselves and each other. The worst thing that my father could call my mom is a Oaxaquita. It was so inferior to be called that even growing up later in my life, much later in my life, I would catch my mother describing other women that are indigenous like us, pinche vieja Oaxaquita, and things of that nature. She found it to be such an insult that she grew up to use the same words to insult and describe other people that look just like us. But it's so inferior to look like us that we can't help. But when we're gonna insult another indigenous person, we know that the most insulting word we can use is indigenous. Hence, Oaxaquita. Now, you see, I sat here and shared with you about growing up in a region where we're indigenous, where we hate our skin complexion. But yet, although we are indigenous and we know it because we can't escape it, we still have a people to look down upon. Although we feel inferior because we know what we are, there's still a people that we look down upon as indigenous people, and those people are the people of Oaxaca. Hence, Oaxaquita. Now, why do I mention this? Because this woman here is from Oaxaca, a woman that speaks Mixteco as a first language. So, my question to you, Abby, is you being a woman of Oaxaca who sees an indigenous person use a terminology that was created out of the hatred that we have for indigeneity, specifically people of your region. How do you feel about that?
It feels like shit, honestly. I'm not even gonna put it in a nice way because, like, that's what it feels like. Because it makes you question your whole existence. It makes you question why are they using the place where I was born in as an insult.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes you question who you are. It makes you question how you look, where you're gonna go, and the things that you're gonna do. It makes you question everything. I didn't get to choose to be born there, but yet I'm already labeled, as La India or La Pobre because I come from there.
So what is that, La Pobre?
Basically, that people think that people from Oaxaca are like the dirt of the poor of the poor. Like, that's it. Like, you can't go any lower. As soon as someone, says, where are you from? And I say Oaxaca, they associate the term Oaxaca with being, indigenous, being poor.
We we associate poverty, inferiority, the lowest of low with Oaxaca. When I was learning who I was so excited to know pretty much where I come from. That, hey man, listen, this whole time we thought we were Mexicans, and although technically we are, there's something deeper to just being Mexican. So when I was learning the history, I remember I thought that if I shared it with my mom, I would perhaps awaken something in her and perhaps also help her develop pride in that. So one day, I sat with her and I said, hey mom, I was doing some research and I was finding out that we people from where we're from, we were known as Chichimeca. And she looks at me and she says, huh? It's like, yeah, we spoke an indigenous language and we're indigenous people, mom. And she says, no, we're not. I said, mom, what do you mean? We're indigenous people. And she says, ¿estás pendejo? I said, then what are we, mom? And she says, somos mexicanos. Like, yeah, I know, but ethnically, we're Mexicans because we're born there. Sure, I got you. But ethnically, what are we? And she's so puzzled. Somos mexicanos, mijo? Yeah, mom, but that's our nationality. We're just born in Mexico, sure. But ethnically, mom, what are we? She looks at me, she says, no sé, pero no somos pinches indios. And that's when I realized, you see, it's worked. The plan and the efforts of the colonizer have worked. We are ashamed to be what we're supposed to be. Or more accurately, we were taught to be ashamed of our origins. So now we have a bunch of people talking about, yo no soy un pinche indio. And then we refer to people of Oaxaca, Oaxaquita. See, all these things begin to make sense to me. Everything begins to make sense. Now, me thinking back on when I was a kid and my dad used to call her pinche Oaxaquita fea. Now I was like, I get it. So now that I bring forth this piece of knowledge, piece of information to my mom, we're indigenous people. All she probably, her trauma told her, is my son trying to tell me that we're those Oaxaquitas? So it makes complete sense why we are the way that we are. And not just the self-shame aspect of it. Not only are we taught to feel ashamed of who we are, so we're over here talking about, somos de España and stuff like that, right? But worse is we also have these people trying to throw terminologies at us, talking about Latino, Hispanic. Notice how everything they throw at us identifies us as people of Europe. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that the systemic effort is to do their best to try to identify us as if we're people of Europe? How come they never try to umbrella us all as indigenous people? If you must umbrella us all, why is it always the umbrella of the identity that belongs to Europeans? Why are we never umbrellaed under the identity of indigenous people? It's because black people, y'all cry too much. Y'all complain too much. You're victims. Here's the thing. That crying, that complaining is what caused black people to fight. If it weren't for black people put in prison for fighting and getting murked a lot of times, if it weren't for that, a lot of minorities in this country wouldn't have these systemic opportunities that we do today. The irony that I see when I see Mexicans or Mexican Americans tell black people that y'all cry too much, y'all complain, y'all just victims. But it is that crying and that complaining what caused y'all to fight for all of us. For all of us. Literally, we Mexican, and I speak for myself, we're so prideful that we choose to be quiet a lot of times as we're being systemically mistreated and we face systemic inequalities. And due to that is why we as Mexican people are so behind. It's so behind, and we get mistreated so much in this country because we don't complain. We don't cry. We are just bullied around, being pushed around by everybody, as opposed to black people who said, nah, we're going to fight. And that sacrifice, while fighting, has enabled all minorities. Not just Mexicans, Asians, Indians, everybody in this country benefits from the civil rights movements that was fought by black people. So my personal opinion in regards to black people always complaining, black people always crying, we need to stop identifying that as crying and complaining and really call it, we're tired of systemic inequality, systemic oppression, and we are going to finally stand up and change things. That is what a lot of Mexican people can't see. We call that crying, but the reality is that the reason why we are in the conditions that we are is because we don't cry enough.